Welcome, everyone. It's time for your baseline test. This is John Webster Film. Today, I am joined by a absolutely wonderful special guest, Emmett from NotACast. You may know him as Poor Quentin. We're going to be talking about, not kidding, my favorite film of probably the past 10 years, if not more, Blade Runner 2049. So welcome, Emmett.
Thanks so much for having me, John. I've been looking forward to this a lot. I remember movie theaters. I remember enjoying the theater experience of this particular movie so much, seeing it up on the huge screen. It's such a visual experience. But even coming back to it, rewatching on my little screen at home, it was just a delight. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you for coming on. I know what you mean. This is one that, it was more of a regular thing when I was in my teenage years that I would go back to see a movie repeatedly.
Yes,
but I hadn't done it in a number of years. But with this one, I saw it, I think, at least 3, if not 4 times in the theater, because nice. I wanted to hang on to that experience.
Yeah, you want to live inside that world, and that's always the pull of Blade Runner, past and present. It's like, an entire sci-fi conception you can imagine yourself living inside. And yeah, it was definitely brought back to life in the new one.
Yeah, and I remember hearing people who were fans of the original. I think there's a bonus feature on the Blade Runner 5-disc set where people just talk about their theatrical experience and how it sort of changed the way they saw things and was such a transformative experience. And I don't think I ever quite had that experience with the original, and especially since I never saw it in theaters either.
Sure, of course, before our time.
Yeah, but this kind of felt like it was the equivalent experience for me, because it was just like that kind of chills down your spine. I can't believe what I'm seeing type of thing. Absolutely.
Just in the great slow grace of it all, where you can just kind of take in the images. That's something, of course, people love from the original. It's not, obviously certain, faster editing styles are appropriate for other movies, but the glory of the Blade Runner universe is just soaking it in and getting time to look at each individual detail. And that was just the fun of, half the fun, I think, of watching this new movie is keeping your eye on the back of the frame, like what's going to emerge, what else is going to be a part of this scene, because so many scenes in that movie work this way. An unexpected element happens and you're cool with it. It's great.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to point out a couple of people, because one great thing I told you, Emmett, about the Slack group we have. We just recently formed it, and so a nice side effect of that is that I've gotten incredibly friendly with many of the chat members, and so I want to point them out. And yeah, Amy, you pointed out the Philip K. Dick reference in K's name, which I stupidly completely missed, but it's kind of inspired my own little name for today.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I love all the little names in the new one are great. Joy and Love and K, a very kind of ironic that they're being named for things that kind of aren't in this universe at all. There's not much joy and love to be found in most of the Blade Runner world, unfortunately.
I see that Chloe's in the chat. Thank you so much for coming up. Yeah, so let's just start off by stepping a little bit back and talking about our sort of history and experience with the original film. Why don't you go ahead and start?
Well, where to begin with Blade Runner? Obviously, it's so insanely influential across so many forms of media in so many different ways. It's one of the generally consensus revered sci-fi canonical classics at this point, like 2001 or Star Wars before it. It's had kind of a long muddled road to getting there, in part because there's just still no consensus form of Blade Runner. No matter what Ridley Scott says is the final authoritative cut, that argument's just never going to end about what the real Blade Runner is. But it's also in part because it's one of those movies that was kind of infamously critically panned or just had mixed reviews at the time and became established as a classic later. And sometimes with those movies, it's like you go back and it's just like, okay, the critics just weren't paying attention properly. Like with The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing that came out the same year as Blade Runner, that got bad reviews, and you go back like, no, this is a masterpiece. Everyone was just wrong. With Blade Runner, I kind of get it because it was changing so many things about the way sci-fi was working. And if you read interviews with Denis Villeneuve or Ryan Gosling, they talk about their love of movies and their love of sci-fi just coming from Blade Runner, and it changed their whole idea about what these kind of movies could be. So I think people kind of just had to scramble to deal with that influence. And Ridley Scott has talked about seeing the influence trickle down in like MTV and like comic books, like seeing just like the style of Blade Runner. Ryan Gosling says when he was a young man, moved to LA, he went to the places where they filmed and just walked around those buildings because he loved it so much. And I really relate to that aspect of the older Blade Runner, this sense again of like full immersion. Like this isn't just, you know, someone slapped a coat of sci-fi paint on their lazy imagining of what LA is supposed to be. Like this is a whole new world. And I love that aspect of it. The more kind of human aspects of it, you know, ironically, so to speak, I never quite gelled for me as much. Ryan Gosling said in an interview that, you know, what was really influential about Blade Runner is, you know, the style of it, but no one ever really captured its soul. And I wonder if that my case, the soul is kind of muddled. Like the central romantic relationship in the movie never really worked for me. It felt a little like it's because they're trying to be cynical and noir. You know, it's complicated. Do I love you? Do I hate you? Is this violence? Is this love? But I don't know. I think really, like you guys were talking about Gladiator on this channel, and like I think Ridley Scott works well when his relationships are very kind of simple and sentimental, and he can just kind of work his style through them. So I think for Blade Runner, I always loved in terms of the technique and the look and the majesty of it all. But character wise, it's never one of those, you know, that made me emotional and made me think of myself as the protagonist. It was never on that list for me.
Yeah, I think that for me, the humanity of the original film strangely comes from the replicants. Because especially as I always feel weird when I watch the original, because I start off, I'll turn it on and I'll be like, I don't know if I'm quite into this, because it leaves me cold. And then as the movie progresses and it reaches its end, I find myself emotionally involved. And a lot of that has to do with the deeper it gets into Roy's character.
That's a good point.
And then the way, you know, and the way he interacts with Chris, and that for me is an emotional anchor, that because it becomes a stronger element towards the end, that works for me. So it's kind of weird. I go on this journey with the film while I'm watching it, of being removed and then engaged as it progresses.
That's a really good way of putting it. I mean, so much of Blade Runner is trying to get that active engagement from the audience on the most basic level of, is this a human being you're looking at, or is it a replicant? Can you tell? And if you can't tell, what's the difference? And I think from that central point, I think both movies are trying to, get you to kind of fill in the gaps and kind of project yourself into it a little bit, because they are both very cold and glacial movies. And I think you're totally right about Roy gradually becoming more the emotional kind of focus and center of Blade Runner. And that seems like where a lot of the interest goes, which I think so it was a kind of a natural development, that not a Roy-esque figure, because Kay isn't really like Roy in terms of personality, but an explicit replicant becomes the center of the film in the sequel. That seems like a kind of natural development.
Yeah, and Dan says it's a brain movie, not a heart movie. Yeah, I do kind of feel that way about the original, particularly. But that said, my experience with this new one has been so completely different, because as I said, when I sat down to watch the new one, I don't know. I don't remember how I felt like going into it. I was really looking forward to it, because I do love what was done with the world of the original, but I was waiting to be sort of emotionally immersed in the story. And this one just grabbed me from like the opening moments. And as I say, and it's funny, because you could compare the box office reception of both films kind of similar, and a lot of people unfortunately haven't seen this one either. I think it's one that'll grow in stature with time, but it was very, very critically well received in contrast to the original. So it may have a leg up in that regard.
I think the context that's been created by people looking back at the original, I think, helped to create a different framework for this one. I remember going in worrying it was going to be generic in a way that a lot of kind of remakes and sequels are, that don't expand, don't revisit, don't really critique anything. Not that every, sequel remake has to say the original was terrible and here's why. I think that can be, annoying in its own regard. But to establish your own sense of things and your own, a movie that justifies its existence and doesn't just feel like a cash grab. And I think what really moved me and grabbed me right away, as it grabbed you, was a sense of, not just a sense of emotion, but the importance of an emotion. Because what's the first big interaction in the film is about, new models aren't, you're hunting your own kind and you're not leading fulfilling life because you don't know what a miracle is. You don't know what an emotion is. You're living in the sterile Blade Runner universe where you're not allowed to feel things, and you have to have some kind of spiritual reawakening. You have to connect to things again. And I love that. That's what drew me in, is kind of what I needed from the movie ended up being what the movie was about, was that search for an emotional engagement and connection. And that really drew me in.
Yeah. And I do want to make note, since, and we're going to go in and start talking about the story, that, well, first of all, this, as with all my other discussions, pretty much this is a spoiler discussion. I say that because there's no way to talk about this movie without diving into spoilers details, but I think a number of people in the chat have actually had the opportunity to watch the movie, so I'm happy about that. Secondly, I have to mention that Hampton Fancher, who was a writer, the writer on the original Blade Runner film, actually wrote the story for this one as well. And that just, to me, I'm like, does that happen very often these days, that someone, who wrote an original film from, God, how many years ago was it? It was 82. So God, what is that? Almost 40 years ago. And has actually been able to have the opportunity to actually write the script for, a follow-up that came all this time later. I mean, right then, that it's going to have the DNA of Blade Runner.
For sure. I think it's important to have that connective tissue and to respect it, because I'm thinking, well, then you'd bring Lawrence Kasdan, who, wrote on the original Star Wars trilogy, bring him back for Force Awakens. And, from what we can kind of tell, it seems that was more there to bring back the kind of same structure and same riffs of the original trilogy, and not so much to take those in a new direction. And I think I like the balance they achieve with the new Blade Runner, where you have that authenticity and that spirit of the original creators, but also an eagerness to expand on it and kind of take it in new directions. And I think that's exactly the balance you want to achieve. You don't want to break from the past completely, but you don't want to retread either. That's really hard.
Yeah, it didn't feel like a retread. It did feel like this is another chapter of the story. There was forward progression instead of just, I'm not saying anything about any other movies, but not just focusing all on the nostalgia.
It's not just, you remember Blade Runner, don't you? Here you go. Yeah, you don't like being pandered to. Or you shouldn't like being pandered to. I know some folks do.
Yeah, and so, I mean, I really like this. I have to say that I did have one particular detail spoiled for me going into the movie, and that is that Kay was a replicant. But to the marketing, the credit of the marketing, they really didn't make a point of that. And so when you go into this movie, you don't know, because Deckard's true nature in the original film was left in mystery, and if you watch the theatrical, there's no mystery. He's human. But depending on which version, but they never said, okay, Blade Runners are also replicants, but in this film, that is what they are. And so you have this bit of a surprise when it turns out that you don't actually need to be worried about this guy going up against Dave Bautista, because he can handle himself. But
yeah, that's a very specific bit of casting that I absolutely love. That's how you establish that Kay, knows what he's doing and can go up against the best. You have Dave Bautista, who we all know, we all know and love. So yeah, that's a wonderful early showdown. But yeah, I love the unsettling quality of not knowing, especially early on in the movie, in any given scene, really who's a replicant until they're introduced to these characters and have more time with them. Because The fact that you could have Blade Runners, people hunting down replicants, be themselves replicants, we could keep going and say maybe his boss is a replicant. We don't know. Maybe her boss. Like, you could keep going up the entire social ladder until you get back to humans, because you have this society that's been arranged now with the robots just hunting each other. So it's a great way of keeping the audience on edge, building that mystery in of, who is being controlled and manipulated by who here. And it's very difficult to tell at first.
Yeah. And I'll take the opportunity to just kind of go through the cast at this point, because
Sure.
I mean, they got some brilliant actors, because Ryan Gosling he has that ability to, with his eyes, to both, you buy that he's a replicant, because there's kind of there's a lot of depth behind his eyes, but also he gives you this kind of blank look that makes, that could slightly unnerve you, and,
Sure.
representing that he's, a synthetic human. And I don't know, he's just perfect. And apparently the filmmakers were kind of in agreement. I love the story that Harrison Ford suggested him, and they were like, oh no, yeah, we already have him in mind.
We wrote this with him in mind. Yeah, that's perfect. Well, I think Harrison Ford probably gets that kind of the appeal. One of big Harrison Ford's big appeals is that he just kind of always looks rumpled and always just looks like his costume never quite fits. And that's kind of what's great about Harrison Ford. In the Indiana Jones movie, it's like, his hat is always kind of a little off, and he's always kind of a step behind. He's not perfect suave James Bond. And that was the appeal from Harrison Ford in the original Blade Runner, is this perfect synthetic future, but it's Harrison Ford. So it's his messy hair and his permanently annoyed, fixed scowl expression. And the same thing works here, I think, in contrast to Ryan Gosling, who is, an eerily handsome man, which definitely helps the casting. And as you say, he does a great job just with his eyes of showing you this blankness, but you're not sure if, like, is that genuine blankness, or is he acting like that because he's scared of what happens if people figure out he's starting to get emotions? Like, are we seeing a real nothingness, or is he playing nothingness now? Which I just love as the character's arc.
Yeah, well, I mean, and talking about emotions, this is a great time. We'll, I'll name another cast member, and then we can launch into a discussion there, which is Ana de Armas, who plays Joy, who, this is like the first thing that I really noticed her. And a lot of people have been giving her acclaim for Knives Out, but this is when I saw her and I was like, holy crap, this actress is really good. And they have such a beautiful relationship that's kind of, it's hard to figure out exactly the true nature of it, because you could go on and on, but she's fantastic. And it's a relationship between a replicant and, a hologram, and essentially, so there's it's such a wonderfully human relationship at the center of this movie, and neither one of them is a human.
Right. That's a great way of putting it. And it works because neither of them is a human. So there is no standard for them to measure themselves against and fail. You know what I mean? It's just the two of them, so they can be just the two of them, and kind of on a more equal footing. And it's humanity it's like beauty. It's in the eye of the beholder. They see it in each other and they create that, but they're also just so, like, not free. They're just so completely controlled. There's that brutal moment when they're like, he's given her this new technology. I forget the name of it exactly, the emulator, I think, or something like that, where she can be more physical and more real. And they go outside to enjoy the rain, and then just when she's enjoying herself, like, she freezes and she pauses because he's getting a voice message from his boss, so he has to just completely leave her in that position. And it's just so heartbreaking. Like, you're in this romantic movie moment with these these actors relating to each other, and then you're reminded all at once, they are not in control of any of this, and at any time, these people who puppeteer them can just stop their romance. And it's just really sad.
Yeah, it's, in particular, just the way she is frozen there, sort of mid kiss and all that. It brutal is the right word, because that's what it is. And I mean, I suppose we can dive right into it. What do you make of Joy as far as whether she has a true sense of self? Because later in the film, we do get that beautiful scene in in the rain with
Mhm.
the giant Joy marketing hologram where she calls him a good Joe, which is what Joy his Joy starts to call him at a point in the film Joe. So we're like, so was that programmed, and is it just is there real substance to their relationship? And so what did you make of that?
Yeah, it's another heartbreaking moment because it's so ambiguous. But it felt to me on rewatch like there is an inviolate self in there. There is a person in there, but it's not free, and it's never given just like a container where it can just be itself. Like she's always getting filtered through like that advertisement system or whatever technology he can buy. So I felt like it's in there, but it can't be like accessed, and you can't get to it. It's like holding a seance or something. You know what I mean? It's like trying to talk to a ghost. It's like maybe there is something there, but you're just kind of tortured by it because it's always going to be held away from you. So yeah, I definitely felt emotionally like there was that she does have some kind of soul, and there was something there. But part of the whole movie is that might just be a projection on my part, right? It might be a projection on his part. I might just be reading it into that as I want it to be there. Like he's reading into it because he wants it to be there. So you kind of have to be aware of that. And that's what makes it so sad. Again, I just keep coming back to that. It's just really sad stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my preference there is to view it as she's set with sort of pre-programmed ideas and commands, but and the name Joe is in there because that's sort of part of the programming, but she's not necessarily just using that as part of her programming. It's there, and she's actually feeling for him in the moment. But again, it's like, is that just because I want to believe that? I need to believe that she's more human, and it just it's so heartbreaking because
You're right, though. She might, even if it's a pre-programmed tool, it's how you express it, right? It's what you use it for. Because really, obviously our brains are more complex than a simple, rote mantra repeating. But really, we only know so many words, each of us, and we struggle to express our emotions as best we can. But oftentimes we're just kind of repeating stuff we've heard or stuff we've seen in movies or stuff we think will get it across. And we're still trying. So maybe in a way she is just trying to express an emotion she feels with the very limited words she's been given. And that, same with what Roy says in the original, right? It's just going to be tears in the rain. It's this genuine thing is going to be lost in just the endless sea of nothing real. So yeah, I think she's just doing her best.
Yeah, Amy, that's something that sticks out to me too, that her last words are "I love you," and she made sure to say that to Kay. It's one of those things like, so as a holographic program, that's how she chooses to spend her final moments, that she has to make sure that she gets that out to him. So I think my feeling on it is, even if she's programmed to do certain things, I believe that she believes she has genuine emotions and feelings. And that's so it's that thing of, doesn't that make it, if it's real for her, then isn't that real? I mean, that's the way I choose to view it, whether that's me needing that's that could very well be, but you know what? That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
No, I like that. I mean, you have to cross that gap because it's so easy to dehumanize not just machines, but other humans, as we see in both Blade Runner movies. That's not like the humans are doing great while the replicants are alone being hunted. Like, clearly the society is unequal and horrible in a lot of ways. And so that detachment is it's produced this entire world that just worships like these couple of guys and their ability to create everything. And so much of what both movies are about is to try to cross that gap with another individual and to try to try to create a space outside that. Like, you can try to access a genuine emotion, and that's kind of how your only way of defying the world you live in, is because you have these extremely cold worlds, and you can't break down, you can't rebel properly, so you just have to try to love one another, and that's really the best you can do. And I always like that sentiment, that spirit.
Yeah. And so the Joy K relationship is, for me, what I was talking about, the fact that this movie grips me emotionally, and that's at the center of it, because I do agree that the relationship between Deckard and Rachel in the original film doesn't really do it for me, because also there's some uncomfortableness in that relationship, and so it never quite engaged me. But it actually, ironically, it does in this film, with the way that they choose to portray that relationship with Deckard's emotion, and the way that Harrison performs, that emotion of remembering her and stuff. So I actually think that retroactively that kind of helps with the gaps in the original film. But
agreed. That's a great, interesting way of thinking about it, that it's kind of, in memory, it becomes more powerful, which is kind of how our memory of the older film works. Like Ryan Gosling said in an interview about this one, that it was wild to make this movie. So much of this movie is, of course, about memories and trying to access your memories and what happened to you. And that was a wild process for him, because he was also working with his memories of the original movie. And that's a great thing that this new one was able to do, I think, is to kind of create this, for me, a more compelling version of the Deckard-Rachel relationship in absence of it. And yeah, I thought it was really powerful how that kind of loss seemed to register and go through the whole movie, because of course, the instigating incident of the movie is finding her remains, and it's just so she kind of becomes this big center for the movie.
Yeah, Amy, that is an important point. And actually, I did want to take the opportunity to mention, I don't remember exactly which interview it was, but I have heard Denis Villeneuve, the director, talk about this, where this is a movie that's set in a future. It's not our future, it is the future projected forward from the original Blade Runner. But also, even though it's set in the future, it's not about the future. It's very much about our present world. Is the way he said he knows how to talk about the way the world is, and do it through the prism of a movie set in this sort of dystopian future. So I think that the way that women are viewed and treated in this world is very representative of where we are in sort of present day society. And I think it becomes kind of powerful to view it through that lens. It sucks, unfortunately.
Right. That's true. I think there's this theme in the movie about the ability to conceive and the ability to bear children as something that everyone in power wants to either destroy that or control it. And those are the only two options that are acceptable for the people in power. And the notion of letting a woman, whether human or replicant, be to kind of make her own choices and to have their own family and to pursue it in whatever they want, that's just like inconceivable to them. But you have the more kind of militarized police side of things, which is like, this will, the possibility of a replicant being able to conceive will change things forever. We have to shut this down. And the more corporate side of things is like, it might be useful, actually. Let's see if we can control that for our own ends. And I think the point that is subtly built to throughout the movie is that, you have to respect individual agency and to, humanity. You have to respect that individual's right to make whatever choices they want and not have their natural ability to conceive be yoked to the needs of the larger society around them.
Yeah, and I guess that would lead us to talking about Wallace himself.
Sure.
Who
Jared.
Yeah, Jared Leto, who is chilling in this, and it's amazing to me that he only has 2 scenes in the movie, but Wallace
I'd
leaves
forgotten about that until I rewatched it.
such an impression,
Mm-hmm.
and we see how he views his creations. Like he goes to inspect a model, but then it's of no use to him, so you know so he discards it because it's just one of countless. So, and it's just so brutal because they're talking in that scene about procreation and needing to find
Mm-hmm.
this key to unlock, and the fact that it's this the female replicant that he just brutally murders in that scene, and the way that love reacts in that moment to it, because it's as supposedly close as they are, it's it can also be seen as a warning to her if she fails.
Exactly. She's like, if he's going to do this so coldly to this replicant, what will he do to me? If if he needs to move on, if I don't measure up. And yeah, that scene is so brutal, and it made me think of 2001. A lot of the Blade Runner movies make me think of 2001 just visually, but the idea in 2001 that humanity turns on Hal the robot just because he's not perfect, and we can't stand that. And even though he's not perfect because we made him, and we're not perfect. And that same sense with Wallace of this hatred that he can't perfect his creation. He can't make it exactly what he wants. And if he can't do that, then he will kill it, even though it's this being who just came to life in front of him. And that what I really was haunting in that scene when he talks about how because of all his technology and all he's done, humanity has conquered these 9 worlds. And he's like all scornful, 9, a child can count to 9. We should be on billions of worlds. And it's like, oh, it's like his achieving of his ambition just like unleashed this even worse wave of ambition. It's like he walked into a dark room, and as long as it was dark, he could imagine it was nice and small. But he lit this candle, and now he sees how big it is, and it's like, oh, I have to conquer it. I have to have everything now that I've seen what I can do. And it's again like he's completely divorced from any sense of like, oh, here's an individual life. Isn't that a miracle? Isn't this a person? It's that none of that means anything to him anymore, and that's what the hero has to uncover and believe in, that miracle, like I was saying earlier, that his generation has been left out. And Wallace, for all his power, he just like the notion that something is beautiful in itself. He can't even have that anymore.
Yeah, it's funny because Jared Leto did say in an interview that he has a unique view on Wallace. He certainly doesn't consider him a good person or anything, but
sure.
But here is this guy who, through his various developments and creations, has literally saved humanity, and so he naturally has an ego to go along with that, because there's people with much just as big egos who have accomplished far less, as he puts it.
Right. I do love that moment. That's very true. And yeah, I mean, it's the question of whether that savior instinct can take you, and what it's gonna do to you along the way. And yeah, I think Denis Villeneuve has talked about the person he wanted for that role really being David Bowie, but of course David Bowie sadly passed before that could be possible.
Can I just say that would have been incredible?
That would have been wild. I think Jared Leto, I think is like visually in terms of how he carries himself is kind of like David Bowie. So I think it was a really a good casting in that regard. But that same sense of being like you've climbed so high, so unimaginably, and done in your mind so much good that the notion that any step you take could be bad is just like absurd. Like, what do you mean I'm going too far or killing too many? Like, look at the billions I've saved. And he's just kind of he's cut off from any critique, and in part because he's surrounded himself by people he's created. And he talks about like his areas is the kingdom of heaven, and he talks about I create angels here. So it's clear like God delusion. So I think it's a questioning like, what would God be like if we met him? Would we actually love him, or would he seem kind of like cold and detached from us? And I think that's what they're trying to do there.
Yeah. And I'm kind of wanting to hold off for a little bit on talking about his his final scene, which is with
Mm,
Deckard, because we'll get to that. But I will just say that, yeah, as much as, you know, I hear that Bowie might have done the role, and I'm like, oh my god, that would have been great. But hats off to Jared, because he did do a really great job, and he actually, for the role, he was, you know, he didn't, you know, go without the sight of his eyes, because, you know, he's a method actor like that. So,
sure. Well, as you say, it's impressive what he does with only 2 scenes, and it feels like I don't know, he lingers through the rest of the movie, you know,
yeah,
because he makes such an impression, and you get the sense that the way this world works is really, really because of him more than anybody else. So it's like every other scene is just like, this is Wallace's world, and, you know, and we're just living in it. And I do like that.
and so that, you know, naturally leads us to another character who is probably, you know, I mean, I probably have so many different favorites in this movie, but, you know, you can't help but love her, who is Love. Because she is simultaneously like a very dangerous psychopathic killer, but also she's, you know, an adolescent, because they've said that she's 12 years old. That's what they had decided on. And so she's very immature, and she's got that sort of, you know, gotta please father type of thing going on. And you can see that when she echoes, you know, Wallace has this very creepy kiss that he gives to the replicant in that scene after he kills her, and Love does the same thing when she thinks she's, you know, killed Kay in the final scene. So she's trying to sort of follow Wallace's lead and learn from him. So it's just, it's so creepy, but she is like watching a kid. You kind of feel for her in that she's trying to find her way, but she just doesn't have the emotional maturity.
Yeah, all she can do is imitate what she's seen, and it's similar in some ways to Pris from the original, who also had this mix of childlike innocence, but also extremely, you know, dangerous, lethal skills. And there's a kind of a fairy tale aspect to that, you know, that you have this like a character who has basically almost like superpowers, really, even though it's you know, sci-fi and technology. It feels just so incongruous and otherworldly that you have someone with this kind of childlike mindset, but these abilities, and lives in this world. And that's kind of, she's just in this frozen state and not really able to evolve. But yeah, there's a real ambiguity to her in terms of how much she's in control and how much she's just learned from Wallace, and what she's even able to access, because he's just created her. Again, the God Parallel, he's just created her in his image. And so it's so hard to get outside that.
Yeah, but at the same time, she does have this, you know, from a performance point of view, she has such wonderful moments.
Mm-hmm.
And I just love when, you know, she's talking with Kay when they're listening to the recording, and she says, it is invigorating, you know, hearing like other people, yeah, ask about you, and it gives you a sense of feeling desire. And then she follows it up with, do you enjoy your work, officer? And so there's a moment of flirtation there, even though she's going to be hunting him down later.
I love that, because it's like, she's not even responding to flirting. She's responding to the idea of flirting that she's seeing on a video from years ago. But again, she's all about imitation and mimicking. She sees that behavior, and it's like, and that beautifully captures, I think, what makes someone like Rachel or someone like Kay so dangerous, is that this is all it takes. Like, just like the memory of an emotion, or the idea that I could be emotional, and suddenly you're acting like a human being, and we can't tell if you're a robot anymore. And I love that aspect to the movie, that is as big and, you know, complex as a society is, what they're really talking about is something very, very simple that can be transmitted just between two machines when no one else is looking. But as you say, she can just as easily be flipped the other direction and be sent after him, because she doesn't she doesn't control any of this stuff. You know, she's just reacting.
And the actress's name, I'm probably going to pronounce her last name wrong, but it's Sylvia Hoeks, or
I think that would be my guess too.
Yeah, I mean, again, I haven't seen her in anything else, before this, and she's just stunning. The way that you have the scene between her and Robin Wright later in the film, where she's just brutal, and again, it's this sort of childlike response to everything, and she's like, I'm going to tell Mr. Wallace you tried to kill me first.
Yeah, it's unnerving. It throws Robin Wright off. She even doesn't really know how to handle her, which is I really enjoy it. Robin Wright is her character is not definitely one of the main characters in the movie, but I enjoy her performance as well.
Yeah, and it's great because it's Robin Wright, so
Sure.
she's gonna do a great job, and then there's an image of the scene I was talking about, and it's just great because she has sort of resignation in that scene. I do wonder, because Kay has told her at that point that he is taking care of what she asked, and I think she believes it, but this scene probably plants some doubt. But I think she feels she's done what she can, and so and so she's ready to kind of go out in that scene. But it's brutal to watch, and the way that the way that Villeneuve and Roger Deakins shoot the scene where the actual sort of death blow comes from like an exterior shot. It's just beautiful, which I haven't even mentioned Roger Deakins yet.
The true hero.
Yeah, I mean, if you love any shot from this film, he's the man you want to thank. He's the cinematographer, and this is a guy who was nominated for, I want to say it was 12 Oscars before this,
yeah, and
never won, even though he's a legend in the field. And he finally won for this film, which I was ready for another loss because the Academy doesn't have the greatest imagination when it comes to picking their winners.
Well, delicately put. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and so I did wonder if this was going to be another loss, but I mean, the film is so immaculately shot and so beautiful that I think it was kind of undeniable, and I'm happy about that, because to see him go up on stage, and for this film, which, I mean, I'm just in awe watching. I do have the 4K Blu-ray for this particular film, and when I popped it in, because we did a group watch in the Slack, but the quality was so. But I remember saying before the actual stream, I've got to watch this movie in its full glory, and so I did that last night, and it's just a beauty from start to finish.
It really is. Yeah, Deakins is a great artist in his own right. He's worked with the Coen brothers a ton. He's shot bigger action movies like Skyfall. He always brings a really, really distinct, unique stamp to it. And this movie especially, it's so, he has to do a great job of not just showing beautiful things, although he does that over and over again, him and Denis Villeneuve working together, but moving you through them in a way that kind of unsettles you and makes you, there's so many scenes in this movie that start with an image and you're not quite sure what it is you're looking at. Like, wait, is that light? Am I on the edge of a cliff? Am I entering a room? And then gradually it resolves into what you're looking at, which is just great. Ryan Gosling talked about wanting to work on this project in large part because of Roger Deakins. And he's, Ryan Gosling is kind of choosy with his projects, didn't want to work on a lot of big budget things, and chose this in part for that reason. And said he was watching one of the Coen brothers movies, Barton Fink, that Roger Deakins was the cinematographer on. And Ryan Gosling was talking about, like, there's a shot where he's just zooming in on a wallpaper, and that's all it is, but it's just really unsettling because of how he does it. And I was talking with Roger on at the set, and I said to him, "Am I the wallpaper in this movie?" And Roger said, "Yeah." And it's like, all right, I understand. It's so much of this movie is about you're looking at Kay and feeling with him, but trying to understand what it is he's thinking in any given moment is very difficult. And so much of that is in how Deakins frames him and when he zooms in and when he just, loses him in the crowd. And it's just, you can feel that visual style really snapping into place. So it's beautiful work.
Yeah, in particular, I just think of that final confrontation between, the one and only confrontation between Deckard and Wallace, where, the way that Wallace's, the whole building is lit with the water and the shadows, and you've got sort of the shadows moving across the actors' faces in that scene, and it's like, normally you think, why wouldn't you want Harrison Ford's face constantly lit so you can see all that acting? But it just adds so much there's moments where he's in complete shadow, and and then the light will come back on his face, and it really just adds so much to that scene, and it's just breathtaking work.
It is. It's so tactile, and that makes it, the moments in both Wallace scenes when the blood starts to flow, that's what makes it, part of what makes it so powerful, because visually you're watching every detail and you're so in the scene. So then it's just a jolt when something awful happens, and you feel it so much more viscerally than if you weren't being engaged at that level.
Yeah. And let's see where to move on. There's so much in this movie. I'm trying to think of what point to jump into.
Did you enjoy Harrison Ford himself?
Yes. God, we haven't talked about Harrison. This is one of my favorite performances of his in a really long time.
Same.
Because it's like, he was wonderful coming back as Han Solo in The Force Awakens. I could tell he had a lot of fun, and it was fun to watch him. But with this film, I think you can tell that it was really important for him to bring like his top level game to Deckard. I think it meant a lot to him, and just everything from that scene we've been talking about with Wallace, but also his stuff with Kay, especially when they're sitting down at the bar and talking about what happened with Rachel and all that, the way that it's the pauses, and it's and then he comes in with everything from anger to like full-blooded emotion, and just he was amazing to watch. It's like I said, it's some of my favorite work from him, and I think it's his strongest performance in a really long time. So how did you feel about him?
I agree. I think, much as I always enjoy Harrison Ford, and, fun as it have with, have him back as Han Solo or Indiana Jones, there is a certain kind of elbow in your rib quality to those performances. Like, you remember, you love these guys. And, Deckard, for better or worse, was never as iconic a character in his own right as someone like Han Solo. It's the kind of the questions that arose because of him that really kept people coming back. And I think I love how, just like you said, the pauses, how just exhausted he looked and felt and was. And just this, there's this brief scene with Edward James Olmos playing Gaff from the original, where he says that maybe Deckard finally just got to a place where he could be alone. And that's really sad, but it's also just kind of all he wants at this point is to have his solitude respected. And that's just, for better or worse, it's not going to happen. And towards the end of the movie, without spelling it out directly just yet, we can talk about it later if we want, that he's finally forced to not be alone anymore. He's finally forced to reckon with his place among everyone. And I did really enjoy that, because Harrison Ford plays a curmudgeon so well, in part because he just kind of seems to be one, bless him. And I think it's always enjoyable to watch a cranky, grumpy old man forced to reckon with his heart and what he still loves and what he still wants in the world. And that was great.
Yeah, and I think the way Deckard was played in the original, he was kind of cold and removed. What's beautiful about this is that there's been enough time that's passed and enough history that there's reason for Deckard to be a bit more human. And whether you want to admit that he is human or not. I don't know.
Exactly.
It's up to the individual, but he certainly plays it that way, and it's just, you know, this guy who just is tired and grumpy, and it's great to see Harrison be able to play that. And I mean, what's great about his part in this movie and his performance is that the film works so brilliantly in its first like 2 acts. It has a great story, great characters, and there's been emotion. And then when he shows up, it's like, it's not, oh, here's the star that you've been waiting to make the movie, you know, good.
Right.
Actually, it's, you know, it's,
Yeah.
this movie has been just stunning on every level thus far, and here's the missing piece that's, you know, the part that's going to move the third act forward. And, you know, when he comes in, it's just, it's such a great moment. Just when he's quoting, you know, Treasure Island, it's a great entrance. It really is.
I think that's a really important point you made, where it's not, everything prior to his introduction is not like an excuse or marking time before we get to Harrison Ford, which would have made this movie really kind of a shame. It establishes itself, and then it folds that character and his performance into what it's already established. And that is again, the perfect balance to strike.
Yeah. And it's a shame because, I mean, it's not like they were ever going to keep Harrison Ford a secret in the marketing. And
I wish they could, but that's just impossible.
Because even with the first teaser is literally Kay walking into the building and then leaving.
They can't not do that. Yeah.
To that reveal. And I think it's probably one of my favorite teasers in quite some time, because my feeling about trailers nowadays is that they just, you know, it's sort of wall to wall. Let's show you everything in the movie. And I think that teasers typically are more in line with what I'd like to see from marketing. And even though this does spoil Deckard's return, it's just, you know, it's wonderfully constructed. And like we said, you're not going to keep it a secret. It's Blade Runner, you know, Harrison Ford is in it. That's going to get out.
Exactly. I think they handled it as well as you could, for sure.
Yeah. But that said, the movie is constructed that if you manage to escape, you know, knowing anything about the sequel, this does come as a sort of third act surprise when he comes out. And it's great because it's not just a, you know, even though they've held off on him until this point, it's not a, okay, here's a quick scene with the original actor. He becomes like a very integral part of the third act of the film.
It's not a Bill Murray in the new Ghostbusters where he's there for one scene and, you know, is sitting down the entire time. It's not, you know, it's more dignified than a cameo. It is, he's an essential part of the movie without overwhelming the movie.
Yeah, which, God, I said I wasn't going to mention other movies in comparison, but I can't help it because, you know, I do think that one of the things that J.J. Abrams said about The Force Awakens was the reason why he, you know, held off on Luke until, you know, the very end and didn't make him like an active player in the movie, was because he wanted to establish the new characters. And then, you know, once you bring Luke in, he dominates the movie. But I think that this is a really good example of how you can bring in a central character from, you know, the prior film, and he integrates well with what's been established in with the new characters and everything. I think this was really a brilliant way to do that.
I totally agree, and it's because his big importance to the story is what has already happened in the backstory, and we're just learning more about it. So he does not dominate the present tense of what's happening. This is still very much Kay's story and his investigation and his growth. But, you know, Deckard is an important part to play in it just because of everything that has led to this point, and he has to decide his relationship to that. So he doesn't become, you know, he's more like a kind of a wise sage character in this, almost more than, you know, the action hero in his own right. He has the kind of you know, the important information and the important ideas. He's not taking charge completely, and I think that's good.
Yeah. And you did mention Edward James Olmos in
Always
this,
love seeing
which,
him.
it's great, not only just because we get a quick scene with Gaff, but also I'm such an enormous fan of Battlestar Galactica.
Same
So
here.
anytime to see Edward James Olmos, even if it's just for quick, and I love the fact that he's totally taking a dig at Kay without Kay even realizing it, because he makes his little origami of a sheep
Yeah,
and
that's
places it
wonderful.
there. But yeah, that's wonderful. And okay, so we can talk also about this other character, which is going to lead into probably a conversation about one of the sort of, we'll say, most eye-catching scenes of the movie, which is Mackenzie Davis as Marriott, who is, she's playing she is, and also playing the role of a prostitute, but or sex worker, but she's part of the revolution. So she's gathering information on Kay, and so they want to find out more about him. So she's kind of introduces herself to him, and then it leads to this scene in the middle of the film where it's sort of the centerpiece of the Joy Kay relationship, where she, I guess, calls up Marriott, and there's no other way to put it. They engage in a really a weird sci-fi threesome.
That's about right.
And what's interesting about this is the way they shot it, because Denis Villeneuve said that they actually purposely did it to where the way they did the cameras so that Joy and Marriott didn't line up perfectly. So you had this kind of weird sense of sort of out of body type thing. And again, it's just the way that Villeneuve conceives of these different elements visually is true, because it's kind of similar to what they did in the film Her with Scarlett Johansson, but it is its own sort of thing. And again, it makes for such an emotional point, because they're actually able to finally be together, but then it also leads to further discussion the next morning when Marriott says, quiet now. I've been inside you, not as much there as you think. So it adds another layer of how much of Joy is there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so visually striking and so kind of uncomfortable at first to watch, just because just because it's because of the sexual nature of it, just because you're not entirely sure what it is you're looking at or what exactly is happening between these characters. And as you say, that filters so well into how little we know of Joy and how much of her is actually there. So, how should we be looking at this as this really sweet moment, or is this kind of sad moment where they're getting close to connection but not quite getting it there? And like we were saying earlier, it really kind of, it depends what you bring to the table and makes you think about how much you're kind of inferring. And I think it's really powerful the way it's shot, because I really like Her, but Her is a much more kind of emotionally, I think, kind of grounded. And I mean, that is a criticism of either movie. I think Her is just trying to, her is a relationship movie with sci-fi built around it. I think Blade Runner is really interested in getting at the core ideas of the science fiction in that way. And I think it's a great scene.
Yeah. One of the things that kind of unnerves me about that scene is because they it's kind of interchangeable. Sometimes you see more of Joy, sometimes you see more of Marriott. And the thing that kind of freaks me out about it is that when she steps behind Kay, you clearly see Marriott more. And so that's like, it's this whole thing of when he's not looking at her, it's more of Marriott. So that just sort of adds to kind of feeling uneasy about the nature of joy and how much autonomy she has, and
it's just a projection. But it depends what perspective you're seeing it through, and we're shifting between Kay's perspective and the objective one, and it's difficult to parse, and it's supposed to be difficult to parse because it probably is for him too.
Yeah. And okay, so following that, let me make sure that not. Okay, yeah. I mean, there's some more side characters, but okay, and then we have in Dr. Anna Stelline, who we want to go ahead and get into her true nature. And
I mean, yeah, it's again one of those ones that's hard to talk about without spoiling it. But yeah, I love.
Well, there's a point in the film. There's a point in the film where Kay goes to her because he finds out that after this. Oh God, I've missed another point that I want to talk about. Because there's so much to do, but we'll go back to it. After he's been to the orphanage, it's revealed to him that the memory he has of the horse with the date on it, which he thought was just, an implanted memory, he finds the horse at the orphanage. So the memory actually really happened. So he needs to find out for sure. And so he goes to Dr. Anna Stelline, who makes memories for the Wallace Corporation. And so we get this we think at first it's just this interesting look at how the memories are made and to find out, and she does sort of read him with this thing that's set up in the back of his head that sort of scans him, and finds out that the memory does happen, and he has a very volatile reaction to that. Of course, what we don't know is that she knows a bit more than she's letting on in that moment, because the memory is actually hers, because she is Deckard and Rachel's daughter.
Yes, I love that. Love that twist. That I kind of the double nature of the twist, because as you say, at first he thinks it's an implanted memory, and then it seems to him, oh, this is a real thing. And then he realizes it's both. It is a real thing that happened, but it's still an implanted memory because it didn't happen to you. So I love that kind of that ambiguity of it is great.
Which I really do want that story, because as she even says in that scene, it's illegal to use real memories.
Right.
So what? So what sort of prompted the use of that real memory?
Sure.
And what's interesting at that moment is because he actually asks, "Do you ever use real ones?" And that's her response. So she doesn't say no. She says it's illegal.
Right. That's a good point. Yeah, she does kind of dance around that. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of bittersweet, because it's like I was trying to think, like, how could you create memories for people without using any influence from your own memories? That would be impossible. Like, if I was trying to create an artificial human and give them a backstory, of course my own memories would inform that, because that's my ideas of what memories are. So it's again this society that is trying to recreate human beings, but also cut them off from any of the things that make human beings meaningful. And that's how you get this, people stuck in this situation, like Kay, or like both of them, really, because of course, like as you say, she turns out to be Deckard and Rachel's daughter. And I love that twist, that you're led to think that's what's making Kay special and important, is that he is this chosen one, but it's not him after all.
Yeah. Sorry, trying to read the chat at the same time. Oh wait, there's something going on. I don't know. Bernie's causing some trouble in the chat.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But, I'm used to that. No. So what's great about this entire thing with her is that for a portion of the film, Kay believes that he is Deckard and Rachel's son.
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of expect that because that's the way that, you know, a lot of stories would go. Is that we have our central character, so of course he's important. He's an important integral part. And so it's really kind of both interesting and great, in my opinion, that he turns out to be kind of, yeah, he's not irrelevant, but he's not part of that story. He's, you know, he's someone who's been brought into it and is playing his part, but he's not the chosen one, so to speak.
I like that a lot too, because it emphasizes that what's important about him isn't that he is the chosen one, it's that he thinks he could be. And by the time he finds out he isn't, it doesn't really matter, because the process of humanity has kind of taken over within him, and he's found this new miracle, as Dave Bautista says, to believe in. And I think that's more important, because that process could apply to every replicant. Because, you know, not every replicant is going to be the chosen one, Bowen of Deckard and Rachel, the important one, but all of them have the possibility of going through what Kay went through, which is this kind of reawakening and believing in himself as an individual, and that ultimately ends up being more important. And it's, you know, he kind of accepts that he's more, you know, more a John the Baptist, or more kind of, you know, a Paul on the road to Damascus type than he is the Jesus figure of this universe. And I think that's important, you know, to you know, challenge audience expectations and to keep us watching, but to also emphasize the themes of the overall movie, that, you know, humanity is found in all of these characters, even if it's just a projection, even if they're not really the most important one, that, you know, they all have some worth to them. And I think that's great.
Yeah. And, you know, you could make also comparisons to another film that talked about a certain character not, you know, being, you know, no one, but
True.
But I won't open up that can of worms. But yeah, okay. So I do want to sort of, because, you know, the natural extension of that is, you know, talking about the end of the film. But let me move back a little bit, because and this will lead into me talking about the music. I want to talk about when Kay and Joy decide to go to the orphanage, and there's that cut to, you know, that amazing scene just where they're, you know, flying through, you know, next to the what would you call it? The giant wall, basically.
Oh yeah.
The dam.
Whatever you want to call that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and you have this wonderful piece of music that actually appears nowhere else in the film. And it's a part of Hans Zimmer and Benjamin Wallfish's score, which I think pays great homage to Vangelis's music in the original film, but it's quite different, except for, you know, in the final scene, which is his music. But yeah, because there's so many interesting things. Now, a lot of times you know, the music, I know the sound designers talked about, the idea was that sometimes the sound design would sound like music, and sometimes the music would sound like sound design.
Right.
So it was sort of interchanged, because you do have parts of the score that are almost like a revving engine, almost.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it fits the universe, you know, that kind of layer of industrial sound that haunts like all the outside scenes in both movies, where it's just like, you know, wave after wave of city noises kind of crashing down you because this place is so big. But, you know, the score gets intermixed with that until, you know, it starts feeling, yeah, like you can't really tell the difference between the two, which is, I love that aspect. Which
is funny, because typically that's not my preferred kind of score. I'm very much a sort of classical style score. I like my John Williams, Jerry Goldsmith.
Sure.
You know, but Blade Runner is a very, you know, electronic music, you know.
Yeah, it's more in the John Carpenter school of that, which is, yeah, those. I totally, yeah, I love a good, you know, I love a good full orchestration as much as anybody, but this is its own beast for sure.
Yeah, let me take a moment now, because we are 10 minutes past the hour, so I'm just going to talk about what's coming up. I actually, you know, it's funny, I was telling you guys all that I was going to potentially be moving to doing these every other week, but apparently that won't be anytime soon, because I've scheduled some stuff for the next couple weeks. And next week, I'm talking about the film Carol with the wonderful Emma Smith. And we're both super excited about that.
That's great.
Yeah. And then I'm still, oh, no, I know what's coming up the next week, but you know what? I'm going to hold off on that. But you guys will get a kick out of it. And then I've got another guest set for the week after that. We haven't landed on a topic, but I think it'll be pretty interesting. Yeah, it's going to be so much fun. We're both looking forward to this. And I do apologize, Bernie. I couldn't tell what was going on, guys. All I could tell was you guys were upset about something. But you know, but then again, if it was Beth, I'm going to see. Bernie's going to kill me for this, but I can't be too hard on Beth. She's such a sweetie. Whereas I will ruthlessly go after you, Bernie. Okay, Amy, yeah, I deserve that. So yeah, so next week, Carol, that's going to be so much fun. And yeah, I'd love to talk about the week after, but I'm just going to hold on to that for just a little bit. And so Emma, what do you have coming up? Some people may know that, you know, you have like a pretty popular, podcast and stream. I think they know this. So
in case you don't, I run the NotACast podcast with Jeff Hartman, aka Brendan Beefish. We're going through A Song of Ice and Fire, one chapter a week, one episode a week. We've been doing it for a couple of years now. We're like a little bit over halfway through the second book, A Clash of Kings. And during the plague times, we've been doing our weekly episodes. We've been streaming them over on our YouTube channel. And yeah, we've been having a lot of fun with that, picking apart each chapter and going into them in detail, and hanging out with people in the chat every week has been a lot of fun. So you can check out our YouTube channel is NotACast. You can our regular episodes are over at NotACast, asoiif.podbean.com. We also have a Patreon where folks can get episodes early and a bunch of bonus episodes we do every month. So that's patreon.com/NotACast, ASOIIF. Or you can just find me at Port Quentin on Twitter, where I talk about a Song of Ice and Fire and whatever else drifts past my view at any given day. So yeah, those are all the things we're doing these days. We're like I said, we're a little over halfway through A Clash of Kings. So if you like from a Song of Ice and Fire or Game of Thrones, if you like the King's Landing riot, where all the small peasants rise up against the Lannisters and start killing the elites, we're just about to get to that chapter. That's a lot of fun. So yeah, that's what we're doing.
Real quick, come on, you guys know I'm just kidding. Please don't troll me like this. I love you guys. Okay, so yeah, you don't need me to tell you this, but hats off to all the great work you guys do. And I remember I heard about you guys all the way back when I first started listening to Game of Owns.
Mm-hmm. I love them, of course.
Yeah, before I knew really about anybody else in the fandom, I was aware of you guys, and I always just heard absolutely wonderful things. And yeah, I love Zach and Hannah are great. I've been listening to them since probably like season 3 of Game of Thrones, so that's a long ways back, but.
Yeah, they're wonderful. Zach, especially, is one of my favorite people. I miss him desperately during the quarantine times. And yeah, the best thing about any fandom of any kind, of course, is always the people. And whatever you're talking about is just an excuse to get together with people. So God bless them all. Yeah,
this whole thing gave me the excuse to convince Hannah to come on here, because her and I talked Harry Potter a couple weeks ago. So that was a lot of fun. But. Yeah, okay, so let's move back into the movie. Just what does the movie kind of mean to you? We talked a little bit about this in terms of its themes and what it's trying to communicate. I
come back to that scene with that first scene with Wallace when he talks about how 9 planets are not enough. Just kind of how preposterous that seems at some level. Like really 9 planets, and you think you just haven't gone far enough. When the notion of spreading out across the stars seems so inconceivable to us, living here in 2020. But the fact that it hasn't made him happy at all, and that he's just consumed with getting more and more planets, and that makes me think kind of the point of the movie, or one of the points of the movie, is asking, what is it you miss to get to that point? What is it that Wallace is ignoring? What is this thing that he can't understand that is making him so unhappy? Why isn't he satisfied with 9 planets? And I think the reason is because he doesn't have a soul, really. This thing that everyone keeps talking about in the movie. He doesn't have one, ironically. The guy who's actually in charge and making everything and saved humanity. He has a hole inside where that satisfaction and fulfillment should be, and he just keeps trying to fill it. And the great irony is that the fake person who's just following orders is the one who kind of accidentally stumbles upon that real meaning. And I think, that is far from the newest idea, but there's nothing new under the sun. All the themes come around again, and I always relate to that idea that you can climb your way all the way to the top. If you get there if you lose spirituality and the ability to see meaning in another individual, you're just going to be miserable when you get there, because you're never going to get to the top. There's no end to your ability to create worlds and create species and cross the galaxy. You're never going to get to the finish line. So the finish line has to be something else. And I think that's what this movie is really getting at. And that's what, again, we were talking just about the emotional reaction to it. That's what really hit me as it got towards the end, is that Kay and Deckard have figured out something that Wallace is just never going to figure out.
Yeah. And I do really love that the film ultimately is about human connection, because we do get to that point in the final act of the film where, we get these people coming in from the background where, they're saying, we're forming a revolution, and this girl is going to be a central piece of that. But that's not what the final act of the movie becomes about. It's about reuniting a father with his daughter, and it's about human connection. And I love that that's the final moment of the movie, where it's just so beautiful. And again, it brings back that Vangelis music from the original film, and it's just Deckard walking up to the glass plate and putting his hand up, and it's about this. It's just this moment of this man who's been, kind of lacking human connection and in search of it. And so it's a culmination of both films in that moment, in a way. And as I said, I love that it's not, because the film could very easily be about setting up, like another sequel, and being about, okay, now there's going to be a big war between the replicants and
the Blade Runner cinematic universe. Yep.
Yeah, but it's not that, and I think that's so beautiful.
Agreed, and that's not to obviously discount the importance and emotion of these people rising up and changing their horrible society. That's great too, but. Yeah, it's the age-old dilemma of you got to free the body, but you also got to free the soul. You want to change the world, but you also got to change yourself. Because if you don't, you're just going to end up recreating the same old bullshit, which is what ended up happening in the Blade Runner universe. Is you had this initial burst in the first movie of trying to see replicants as humans, but it faded because no one really did anything with it. No one respected anybody else, and I think that's why I love the kind of emotional core of coming together at the end of this movie, that Kay's ultimate contribution is preserving this individual humanity, and amidst those larger, bigger picture stuff. Because again, the problem with Wallace is he's just lost in the big picture, and like the notion of it caring about any one person is just ridiculous to him. But Kay comes back to it with his real the insistence that the individual matters, and I think I love that.
Yeah, I think Rodrigo nails it right here. And we do get that scene where he's got these weird devices that he uses for eyes.
Those things.
Which...
they look like leeches, like camera leeches. They're terrifying.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, he thinks he understands everything, but actually he understands nothing.
God, and yeah, I just find it really interesting the way they built on this world with, because you have Tyrell in the original film, who's, yeah, I just wondered like how far he wanted to take things versus, you know, Wallace, because Wallace is just sort of, you know, he's really quite insane and a bit of a megalomaniac, and
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, and so I'm not sure like what Tyrell's interests were. I think he was just interested in moving forward, you know, technology, and you know, and sort of helping, you know, provide a service. But Wallace is all about consolidating power for himself.
Tyrell struck me as like a craftsman, kind of, in a way. Like, what was his line? More human than human. Like, he's really into the aesthetics of it. And like, look at this thing I created. Which is, you know, that's messed up in its own way, that he's thinking about these sentient creatures as just like this perfect jewel box he's created. But that's how he talks about them, and like, you know, the way he enjoys playing chess, and like, you know, it's the kind of intellectual puzzle for him. Whereas, yeah, Wallace is like a conqueror. Like, he thinks of himself as the god king of the universe, which is, I think, that's a different level of delusion. I think it comes together around the technology. But I do think, yeah, there's an interesting progression there, and that you start from the person who is obsessed with just the creation and the act of creation, and then you take the next step to the guy who's like, okay, we can use this act of creation to just, you know, spread ourselves all over the universe. And that's yeah, it makes, and yeah, you can see that with, like, I think that's how all technology works to a certain extent, right? Like, the last generation looks almost quaint by comparison to whatever it is you're doing now. And I think that's what happened to Tyrell. He's just like the technology and these companies moved on so much that he looks just small by comparison.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the one of the big things is that the technology has progressed to such an extent with replicants, because they're no longer, you know, as far as the companies are concerned, they can trust the new line of replicants,
right?
Not go haywire. Although that's put to the test by the end, where they're about to form a revolution, and they no longer have, you know, short lifespans. So yeah, that sort of forward progression and how far things can go is a major part of that. Let's just spend some time on the question of the ages with Blade Runner, which is Deckard. And do you subscribe that he is a replicant or human?
I try to preserve the mystery in my head as much as I possibly can, because I like the tension, and I like the uncertainty of it. I think it's hilarious that Ridley Scott and Harrison Ford have just never let this go. And if you read interviews with them, they're still like, not even just like commenting in like an amused way about a fight we used to have. No, this is still a present day fight between these two. And I love that aspect of it. If I had to come down, I would say Deckard is a replicant, just because I think it's just a chilling sci-fi concept that you have them chase and kill each other. Like, again, as you were saying, it's not just about the future. That's the real world too. Like, that's a very much real world function of power structures that try to get poorer people or marginalized people to turn on each other. It's like, if you get them to police themselves, we don't even have to do it. Just get the replicants to hunt the replicants, and the humans can just stand back. I think that fits the society really well, but I do like the uncertainty, because it gets at the idea that it doesn't really matter, and that if you're confused about whether or not to treat someone as a human, well, then you probably should. And I like that aspect. Yeah, I think ultimately I'll side with Ridley Scott, which I don't always do, but I'll side with Ridley Scott on this one. I think he's a replicant. How do you view it?
It's funny because I'm totally with you on the ambiguity, and I think that's the point.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's not the point to Ridley Scott, because he seems to just say no, there's no question, he's a replicant. But I think it's more interesting when it's a question.
Agreed.
Because then that gets to the nature of, sort of the questions that the film's asked about, doesn't matter if, if you're human, aren't replicants just as, don't they have human emotions and feelings and what is real? So I think that the ambiguity and the uncertainty plays into that.
Mm-hmm.
That said, especially after this film, I feel like I'm very much in support of Deckard being human.
Okay.
I don't know. It's just something that I do kind of, as much as I think, sorry, I'm all over the place.
No,
I do feel like in the original film, part of the whole thing is that Deckard doesn't feel very human, and that's probably what plays into him being a replicant. And
right.
And I like that this film really, it feels like this guy who's been through so much, and he feels very human to me.
I think that's a good way of putting it. And it does, there is a charge to, their kid being half human, half replicant and representing a new way forward. I think there is a power to that wouldn't be quite there if both him and Rachel were replicants. So I do appreciate that. And I like emotionally the story of like a human being who is kind of acting like a robot, who is very cold and detached and has kind of give up on life and having to rediscover his own humanity. I like that arc. So, I mean, that's one of the great things about it is it's not just you can argue it either way. You can have an emotionally satisfying story either way, just a kind of a different arc depending on how you think about it, that's really impressive, really. Like, that's hard to pull off.
Yeah, I think especially in the original film, for me, there are hints both ways.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what I like about it, where there's, in my opinion, it's not definite. There's things about the way that Deckard's boss, Bryant, talks to him about things that hint towards, they seem to have a rapport, but this one piece of information, wouldn't he already have that? And it right. kind of, so I think that there's a dichotomy within the actual script of the film.
Mm-hmm.
So I like the fact that it's left to interpretation. But if I was going off of 2049, I do feel like he's kind of the human character, the actual human being, because I think it is valuable to have a character who's human, because we have so many characters that are replicants that I like that he brings that sort of gruff humanity to
I think that's true. I think specifically in contrast to Kay, I think it's good to think about him as a human, whether he is or not. But like in terms of their relationship, I think he needs to be the human, whatever that is. He needs to be that way. I think that's what makes the movie work.
And let's see what else, because we've jumped around, we've talked a lot of different points. Were there things that we haven't gotten into that when you were watching the film you wanted to bring up? I want to make sure that we touch on everything.
Sure. I mean, we've touched on it as we've gone, but the production design is obviously gorgeous. We talked about the cinematography, but just the sets and how complex they are, but there's still a lot of clarity. Like, it doesn't feel like a headache for the most part. I love that I love the contrast between the busyness of the city and how simple, like Dave Bautista's little farm set up at the beginning. Not very complicated, very simple. That contrast really worked well for me. The production designer's name, Dennis Gassner. He talked about walking on a knife's edge. He said it was how he put it in terms of the relationship to the original, which I think is interesting. That you're trying to. It's like they were making a replicant of a movie. You know what I mean? It's like you're trying to make this thing that looks like the original, kind of, but it's not quite the same. And that constant give and take, I think, is something you can see in the movie, because it's like, technologically speaking, you really can't make a set look like the 80s, because the technology has just changed so much that even if you were trying to recreate it, it's like when they try to recreate the look of older Star Trek stuff, and sometimes in the newer Star Trek shows, it's like you can't make things look like the 60s anymore. The technology has just changed so much. So I think they did a great job of balancing it, and I loved the variety of how this film looks, because it's easy to just go Blade Runner, giant city, in your brain because that's what it's most associated with. But Blade Runner 2049 has just so many different sets and so many different little areas, and I love that.
Yeah. What's interesting is that Denis Villeneuve actually did talk about this, where the original film comes from Ridley Scott's perspective of sort of bad nights in London.
Sure.
And his film is coming from Montreal. So
That's
there's lots of snow and stuff. And so it is interesting to have these two different visions. And that's okay because the climate is supposed to have shifted and gotten kind of worse over the years. And so it provides a different feeling for the film. But speaking of the design, one area where this film feels very much like the original in terms of design is once they moved to Las Vegas.
Yes.
Because that was designed by Sid Mead, the original designer of Blade Runner. And I know that Villeneuve said it was important to go to him because we haven't seen Vegas before in the Blade Runner world. So you wanted to make sure it had that DNA of this is Blade Runner. And I remember when I watched it in the movie theater, even though we hadn't seen Vegas in the original film, it really did feel to me like once they, cut to, that location and all the buildings and stuff, I'm like, this feels like we've re-entered the old Blade Runner.
Yeah, I agree. It's a remarkable accomplishment to make it feel like, oh yeah, if Harrison Ford in the original went to Las Vegas, this is what it would be. And it's such a unique challenge because Vegas as it exists is kind of already like a Blade Runner city. Like the way Las Vegas looks on your average night, it's just kind of Blade Runner, like with the screens everywhere and everything is flashing and there's colors and wild costumes. And so there's a unique challenge, I think, in taking a city like that and making it still recognizably itself, but also more that, more sci-fi, more future. And I think they did a wonderful job.
And that is probably my favorite shot in the film, which is it's not, showing off Vegas and everything, but it's sort of the start of that final sequence where it's just that straight cut to Kay walking in the sand.
Yeah.
And everything's orange and it's punctuated with that music, which are those same drums that open up the original film.
Yeah, that's a great moment.
They use those. And probably one of my favorite editing moments in a long time, because I like the way, like, you're in the second act, you're seeing the stuff with Love, she's figuring that, and then it like smash cuts to the final act of the film, and you're like, okay, we're going in.
You sink into your seat. Yeah, that's a great moment for sure. You feel that excitement because obviously it's a long movie, very slow paced a lot of the time, and very appropriately so. But you also need those jolts for the audience, and I think he knows when to put those in there.
Yeah, and Nessie wants us to talk about the bees because Kay, puts his hand in this, because I guess would the implication be that, I mean, are bees not a thing anymore in sort of society? Because he does. That's kind
what
of
I was taking away from that. Yeah,
because he does kind of look like he's not quite sure what they are.
Yeah. Just it's this kind of. Yeah, again, like everything that would be real life is just kind of projected, and it's just an image, and nothing is real. Like, I think that's why I like that there are moments of the natural world cropping up in this movie, and everything that's, it's just, it's a dead tree. Everything is just kind of forlorn and lost. Like the real world is gone. Like, so he doesn't even know like what those animals could possibly be.
Yeah, and let me take a moment, because I am going to pull up that shot that I was talking about if anybody hasn't seen the movie, because I even went to the point where I requested somebody who does like custom soundtrack covers to make me a cover with this image, because it's so beautifully done. Again, it's Roger Deakins. He's a genius. For
sure. It's just so stark. And it's kind of noirish with like, the lone shadowy protagonist, or even, you could even say it looks like a Western, really, almost. It's just, it's a beautiful shot.
Yeah. And of course, this is all leading into that confrontation with Deckard, which we've talked about, but it's just the way that it pushes forward, because as you said, it's a lengthy movie, and I know some people talked about whether the length was a detriment to its potential box office success.
Maybe.
But that said, I think that this point in the film, it gives the movie, sort of, it breathes new life into it at this point, because you're bringing in this character who everybody, knows from the previous film, but it's mixing things up now in the story.
Yeah, it's, the whole, you can feel the audience kind of pulling forward that this is, ironically, it's, it's the kind of the climactic confrontation, but it's not about Kay, our protagonist. It's more just about the ideas these have raised. And I just love that finally here's like someone Wallace can't buy, and someone he can't convince and can't seduce and can't make do whatever he wants. And Deckard says, no, like I loved Rachel specifically, that one, the one who's dead, not whoever you can come up with. That's just not my person. And that idea is just so horrible to Wallace, because that challenges everything he's done. Like, your entire empire, basically what Deckard is saying, is just built on fakes. It's not the real thing. You can't actually recreate humanity. I lived a life with this person and it's over. And that Wallace, that's just a complete challenge to his power, and he just takes it out on this poor new creation he's brought to life. And yeah, I cheer for Deckard in that moment for taking that stand, but also he's guaranteed this new being's death by refusing to live with this new Rachel. He's condemned it, and it's just, it gets a. I think it's I think it might be my favorite overall scene in the movie, just because how it brings those all those emotions and ideas to the surface, and just makes you live with them. And like you're saying, but the lighting is just so slow and perfect. It's great.
Yeah, Harrison's performance in that scene is so emotional and chilling, the way, because he doesn't have that many lines in that film. It's mostly Wallace that does the talking in that scene, and so Deckard is just responding, and the way Harrison takes those like heavy breaths, and especially once Wallace plays the audio recording of his meeting with Rachel, and you can see the longing, and this is what I was talking about before, is it makes that relationship sort of retroactively more emotional.
Absolutely. I mean,
just because you can see his love for her, and I don't remember at what point in their conversation, but Harrison just like, I know, it's when Wallace is teasing with this question of whether Deckard is a replicant or not. He doesn't say it explicitly. Right. He says, "Did it never occur to you that that's why you were summoned in the first place, designed to do nothing but fall in love with her to make that perfect creation?" And then he says, "If you were designed."
Right.
And he says, "Yes, no."
That's a nice subtle touch, preserving that ambiguity, but definitely hinting at it.
And then Harrison does this like deep, heavy breath and then he just goes, "I know what's real."
Yep. That's the line, ain't it?
Yeah. I mean, I was so rooting for. I knew it wasn't going to happen, but I was really rooting for Harrison to get an Oscar nomination that year for this, because it's just such beautiful work, and the film overall, the film actually got a fair number of nominations. I think it got like 5 nominations, and it did better at the British Academy Awards. I think it even got Best Director there, not the win, but a nomination, and so I was really happy to see that.
I think, like a lot of specifically genre movies, they get more acclaim of that kind over time than they do in the moment, just because I think there's certain shorthand where, more obvious, dramatically inclined movies with more kind of literary or historical setting, or biopics about famous historical individuals. These are just the easy shorthand for awards. And I think for sci-fi movies and horror movies and action movies with a more philosophical bent and with something to say and with really thought out styles. I think those tend to gain critical acclaim over time. There are exceptions, like, everyone loved The Matrix right away, but I think as you said earlier, I think this one is going to be more beloved 10 years down the road than it is right now.
Of course, the question there is, because Ridley Scott has talked about potentially doing a third movie and I know there's been talk about that he might direct it himself. How do you feel about that? Because as much as I love Ridley, he's had some misses,
I feel about Ridley Scott like I do about a lot of creative people, you need the right person who has the authority to say no. And it doesn't seem like there's been anyone like that around Ridley Scott for a long time now. And, sometimes I think, I have a romantic attachment to, the individual artist going unfettered and realizing their ambition. I love Ridley Scott's the extended cut of Kingdom of Heaven. I think that's great. And the cut they put into theaters is just not. So I do have the attachment to that, but also he's kind of disappeared up his own butt with the Alien movies. Much as I still overall love the style, I would watch 3 hours of anything set in the Alien universes because I love sinking into that kind of feeling. But I think that he has the potential to make a really pretentious third Blade Runner if he was in charge of it and left to his own devices. One that I think might not track necessarily with the humanity of this one. But again, Ridley Scott's a really accomplished filmmaker who has made movies that have surprised me in the past. So I don't want to say that that's automatically how it would be. I think he could make a really, really beautiful other Blade Runner, but it would not be my first choice.
Yeah, I'm kind of in agreement here. There's stuff about the latest Alien films that I really love, but
me too.
But for me, they do have issues.
Mostly the Alien bits. I actually like what he's doing with Michael Fassbender quite a bit, but I think he's lost his touch for aliens running around spaceships, I think.
Yeah, if the focus was totally on the character of David, I think I'd love it. He needs to make a film that's just about David, and ironically, this isn't a conversation about Ridley Scott's Alien movies, but I know he was trying to leave the alien stuff behind when he did Prometheus.
Yeah,
and then he seems to have gone back in the other direction.
That is bizarre.
The last one, but yeah, I would really personally love a third one if Denis came back to do it.
Sure.
But my
things go with Dune.
Yeah, my feeling though is that I'm really hesitant for anything that kind of ruins this one. This one is so special that I kind of want it to have the room and breadth to establish itself like the original did.
I agree. Give this one some time. It's time for its reputation to settle a little bit, and then I think it would be interesting to see what you could do going forward. I get that that's not, the franchising instinct. I get that, but I think in this particular case, it would be smarter. We'll see.
I think they are doing an anime show.
Oh, are they? Well, that's okay.
Set in the universe, which that would be
so totally different. Yeah, I would definitely watch that.
Sorry, guys. I know I sigh a lot.
Don't we all? I mean, because that's an area of really fertile kind of cross-fertilization is the extended American sci-fi cityscape in movies like Blade Runner, and then the animated and other Japanese live-action versions of that, Blade Runner and then Akira, and all the kind of communication back and forth between American and Japanese artists on that kind of thing. So that's pretty cool. An anime set in the Blade Runner universe I would definitely have to check out. I hope that's good.
And so we are getting close to the end. What would you say was your favorite part of the movie?
Well, like I said, I'm really, as we talked about it, I really started thinking, man, yeah, that Wallace scene with Deckard is really, really great. So that I love that. If I had to pick another single favorite part of it, I mean, I really do love the ending when he's just out there on the steps and he's kind of quietly accepted his fate. I really enjoy when characters it's the classic balance between, what the character wants and what the character needs, right? And in that moment, Kay realizes what he needed was something different than what he thought he wanted throughout the whole movie, which was to be the special chosen one and to have this awareness. And I love I love his acceptance that that's not what's going to happen with him, and that he's okay with that. And I think that's a really sweet moment at the end.
I think what's really neat about that scene is because there's an obvious parallel with Roy at the end of the original.
Yep. True.
And especially since the same music is played.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because everybody has always, fans of the movie have always gone on about, how emotional that scene is. I don't know that I've ever, felt that way. I think it's, that Rutger Hauer gives an extraordinary performance, and I think it's probably one of the best moments of the film, but I never totally got into the whole, it's one of the most, sort of classic of all moments of cinema, the type talk that a lot of people have. But what's interesting is that the use of that same music really struck me emotionally.
Agreed.
And the fact that it called back to that scene, and so in a way, again, it like the fact that it ties into such an emotional scene in this movie, and there's sort of a connection there, it sort of strengthens how I feel about that scene in the original film.
Yeah, well said. I think, the original scene with Roy, I think it's really impressive on like an intellectual and philosophical level. Like you watch it and like, oh, okay, I get what the movie has been about. It's leading up to this. This is the statement. And it's beautiful for that. It doesn't make me like weep for humanity like I think it's probably supposed to, and I think it does for a lot of people, and that's great. But yeah, I think that emotional connection where I kind of see myself in the movie and appreciate it on that level, I think that's better achieved here.
Yeah, and I did actually. I have to admit, I teared up at the final Deckard moment.
It's intense.
The look on his face, he's like taking in a breath in that moment, and he's got his hand up on the glass, and it's so emotional because it's ending on the notes of a father being reunited with his daughter and the promise of what might come next, even though we might not ever see that.
Yeah, and it's just like it's something he didn't even know he needed until that moment. He's been denying it to himself for so long, and he realizes all at once, oh, this is what I've been missing, and now it's here. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, so at this point, I'm going to throw it out to the chat if you guys have stuff that you'd like talked about or questions answered about the film that we haven't talked about, because there's a lot of stuff in this film we could probably dive deep into. But in the meantime, Emmett, I want to talk to you about, because I've asked this to a couple of my guests, what are some of your favorite movies? Oh,
yeah, that's a good question. Well, as far as sci-fi movies go, I brought up the Thing earlier. It came out around the same time as the original Blade Runner. That's an absolute favorite of mine. Just such a beautifully done in terms of suspense and everyone turning on each other and just again feeling just exhausted and cynical and paranoid. I love movies that are people stuck in a situation that is just rapidly getting worse around them, and the screw keeps turning on them. I love movies like that. An older favorite of mine that I rewatched recently is Solaris from the 70s. Another great, like very kind of slow and meditative sci-fi movie about what it means to be human. And there's this alien planet that will like bring the dead back to life for you, but only temporarily. So it just kind of drives people insane. And they're just, in the same way the Blade Runner universe, it's just a projection of what you want, and people just kind of getting haunted by that. And a rival that Denis Villeneuve made right before Blade Runner 2049. I love that movie. That's another great movie about what it means to be a person, filtered through language specifically instead of technology, but very similar themes of like, how do you know who you are? How do you know what you're looking at? How do you communicate properly? And also very emotional.
Yeah, that was the movie that I remember seeing that, and I was like, okay, this guy is going to be perfect for Blade Runner.
It's a smart movie. Yeah.
His style will fit really good in that.
Yeah, I love that movie. That's a near perfect movie for me. That's great.
And Amy does bring up the water scene. It's where Kay and Love are fighting. Yeah, it's brutal. and it's these two killing machines basically who are, fighting to the death, and neither one of them is ready to give an inch, because she's, in her final moment, she's fighting back viciously, just trying to survive. And
yeah, I mean, that's one of the definitions of life is avoiding death, or trying your best to avoid death. I mean, that's part of what makes you human.
And I love that as an action climax for the movie, because it's smaller and intimate than you might expect. And it's just a one-on-one fight. And I love that, because in an age where big action sequences at the end of a movie are, CGI explosions and buildings collapsing and all that, it's nice to see that it's just this brutal, gritty one-on-one battle.
For sure, yeah. I mean, I guess that's Blade Runners. It's not about armies colliding, because all the big picture stuff kind of already works for Wallace. Like, there's no war to be had. I mean, you do have the resistance movement, but as we've said, it's the focus is not on that. Its focus is on much more how do you an individual deal with the individual in front of you in such a world? How do you make sense of it together? And that's great.
Yeah, so as we were talking about favorite movies, do you have any non-sci-fi movies that you really love?
Oh, yeah, sure. I really love The Age of Innocence, the melodrama with Daniel Day-Lewis and Michelle Pfeiffer. That's a favorite movie of mine. That's a really good movie about a very different kind of emotionally constricting world. New York high society, but kind of works the same way. Everyone's a robot on top of that world, all kind of like constricting their emotions. So that's a favorite one of mine. I wish I could go back to movie theaters these days and see new ones. That would be a glorious time. But I know Uncut Gems is on Netflix now. I loved that movie when it was in theaters, so I definitely recommend that. I know Uncut Gems stresses a lot of people out, but it's definitely worth a watch if you haven't.
Yeah, I didn't get to see it, and I saw that pop up. I'm really looking forward to watching that. But
that's really good.
But with The Age of Innocence, I actually just saw that for the first time. I mean, it feels like it was shortly ago, but it was probably a while ago now when the Criterion Blu-ray came out.
Yes, that's what I got it on the shelf behind me. I got the Age of Innocence Criterion Blu-ray. It's gorgeous.
Yeah, I bought that without having ever seen the film, and I was so happy I did, because I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I love that movie a lot.
I mean, with Daniel Day-Lewis, you're pretty safe with the.
Oh, he's so good. He's so good at that movie. When he says to Michelle Pfeiffer at one point, "Don't you know we don't allow our marriages in this country to be arranged?" And he says it so with a smile so sweetly, and it's like, dude, everything in your life is arranged. You just don't realize it, because that's how your whole life works. You poor bastard.
Yeah. Amy says she wants to see New Mutants. So
yeah, right.
That poor movie keeps getting further and further back.
It's true. What a fate.
I actually do. I know a lot of people are kind of cynical about it, but I'm hoping it actually turns out well, because
I would like that.
Because it'll be the last Fox X-Men related film before it's folded into the MCU.
The ever largening umbrella of the MCU. So that's true. I would appreciate it for that as well.
Bernie says Daniel Day-Lewis is Stannis. That would have been something to say.
That's a good one. I think yeah, man. He that would be great. I always picture Michael Shannon as Stannis, because I love imagining him ripping into some of those big speeches. But yeah, Daniel Day-Lewis would be great too.
Yeah, I think Michael Shannon is forever doomed to play those kind of intimidating roles. Although, did you see Knives Out?
Yeah, I thought he was great in that.
He was quite different in that.
I love that scene when he's talking to her in the hallway and he's like subtly intimidating her without really, overtly doing it. That was great.
Yeah. Yeah, we have a few more minutes. Any final thoughts on the movie?
I'm just really, I can just imagine so many worse versions of this movie. You know what I mean? I can imagine a much more generic version of it, a much more pandering version. a more like CGI hellscape version, like action wise that you just mentioned. And I'm just so glad it's not any of those things. We've spent plenty of time talking about like the singular good attributes of it, but like, man, that's a movie that could have sucked. Isn't it nice that it doesn't?
Yeah. I remember my first impression when I heard that the movie was going to be made. I was like, oh, that's not going to be good.
I had that same thought, and I was glad to be wrong.
Yeah, especially, it's funny because I remember hearing like they said Harrison Ford is going to return. I'm like, wait, isn't Harrison Ford supposed to be a replicant? How is he still? How is
Right,
he
exactly.
doing the role? But the way they did it was interesting because he can be possibly a unique form of replicant that was allowed to age and all that stuff. Or, you know, from my perspective, it can be left ambiguous and slanting maybe towards he's human. The fact that it's left still unanswered is good. Although a lot of people do think that it's definitively answered in this movie. And I'm like, I think you just want to see that.
Yeah, exactly. Again, it's all a Rorschach blot, and that's the enduring power of it.
Yeah, so the movie turned out just beautifully, and I mean, I feel like I keep using superlatives for this movie, but it's just the way I feel about it. It's a movie that I wasn't fully prepared for because I've heard, as I said before, I've heard so many times over the years people talking about the original film with such awe and reverence. And I've always kind of felt a little left out by that. You know, it's because I admire the movie a lot, but it's never been one of my favorites. But the fact that I had that experience with this film just makes me really happy.
Agreed completely, buddy. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. If there's nothing else, I think that's a good note to end on. Once again, there's, you know, next week I'll be talking Carol with Emma Smith, so please come back, guys, to watch that. And definitely, you know, I'm gonna say tune in to NotACast, but you all are already. I'm positive of that. But if by some chance there's somebody on here who doesn't watch it, please correct that immediately.
Thanks, buddy. I appreciate you having me on, and have a great time next week. I'm so glad you're having Emma on. You're talking about Carol. That's wonderful. I love that movie, so I'll definitely be tuning in to check that out.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you once more for coming on. It's, you know, this has been a treat, and I was looking for someone who's as invested in this movie as I am. And I was delighted because when we first started talking, you know, I prefaced it with, you know, I'm not quite as big of a fan of the original, and then found out that you and I were on the same note with that.
Yeah, that worked out great.
Yeah, it did. Okay, so I guess that's it. You know, thank you everybody for tuning in, and I apologize and I know you guys had some difficulties with the chat, and you know, I swear I was joking when I was saying that stuff about forgiving you guys, and you know, I just like to play around with you all. And I know you also think that I'm very easy to troll, so I know you guys are playing with me. But anyway, so that'll be it. And thank you all for coming, and I hope you have a wonderful day.